Hey, good morning. Today we are going to take a look at the sine and cosine curve and graphing it. So what I want to do, first of all, up here, just draw in a circle. This is going to represent our unit circle that we've been talking about. Okay, we know that this is 0 degrees, and at 0 degrees my ordered pair is 1, 0. This is 90 degrees or pi over 2. The ordered pair is 0, 1. Pi or 180 degrees, my ordered pair is negative 1, 0. And 270 degrees at 3 pi over 2, my ordered pair is 0, negative 1. And before we go any further, just kind of reminder, this is x is y, x is cosine, y is sine. Now, with that information, we should be able to have no problem filling in this table. So let's just go ahead and fill out the sine table. So what I'm going to do is this, at 0 degrees, sine is 0. At pi over 2, sine is 1. At pi, sine is 0. At 3 pi over 2, sine is negative 1. And at 2 pi, sine is 0. Now let's go ahead and fill it in for cosine. At 0 degrees, cosine is 1. Pi over 2, cosine is 0. At pi, cosine is negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, cosine is 0. And back here at 2 pi, it is positive 1. Sorry about that. But we got a 1. All right, here we go. Now here we have just a grid, and we're going to go ahead and put the sine curve here, cosine curve here. Notice the highest sine ever gets is 1, the lowest it ever gets is negative 1, so 1, negative 1. And at 0, pi, and 2 pi, it's at 0. Now what these marks are going to indicate, this is going to be pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. I'm going to do the same thing coming back this way. But as you know, these are going to be negatives. So let's go ahead and fill it in right quick. Okay. 0 degrees, pi sine is 0. Pi over 2, it's 1. Pi, it's 0. 3 pi over 2, it's negative 1. 2 pi, it's 0. Now we've got to do the same thing the other way. So this is kind of symmetrical with the axes here. But we're just going this way, all right? So negative pi over 2, negative 1, negative pi, it's 0. At pi over 2, or negative 3 pi over 2 means going all the way around here. It's going to be negative or positive 1, and we're back here at 2 pi. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and draw in the sine curve, connecting those dots. So that's what your sine curve looks like. What I like to say is that this one starts in the middle. Goes up, goes down from the middle. Now your cosine curve. You know this is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Now going forward, I'm only going to put in every other one as far as your coordinate is concerned. You can put all these in if you want, but you don't have to. Just know this is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. Negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2, negative 2 pi. Now let's go ahead and follow this along. So at 0, this is 1. At pi over 2, cosine is 0. At pi, cosine is negative 1. 3 pi over 2 is 0. And at 2 pi, it's 1. And it's going to repeat that pattern on the other side of the y-axis. So this is what your cosine curve is going to look like. Like we say, or want to say here with the cosine curve, is that it starts at the top. Now let's talk about a couple things here. From here to here, from 0 to 2 pi, that is one cycle. Then it begins to repeat itself. Period equals 2 pi. Okay? If I go from pi over 2 to 1, that distance is my amplitude. Now if we go right along here, the x-axis, that's the midline, it cuts in half. So spend a couple minutes and write those in. Now going back to amplitude, it's how far up, how far down it goes. In this case, my amplitude is going to equal 1. Whoops, sorry, didn't see that. Amplitude is going to equal 1. Amplitude and period. Y equals A sine bx, or y equals A cosine bx. Now the absolute value of A, that is your amplitude. And that's for both cosine and sine. Your period, for both cosine and sine, is going to be equal to 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. B is just whatever numbers right here, right? Okay, let's take a look. Graph the function to identify the amplitude and the period. So my amplitude, or just amp, is 5. Now my period that's 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi. A quarter period equals pi over 4. Now this is going to come into play in just a minute. Let's jump back up here real quick. Period's 2 pi. A quarter period would be pi over 2. Because all you're doing is you're taking 2 pi divided by 4, and that's where pi over 2 comes into play. So this is a quarter of the graph. Another quarter. From here to here is a quarter, and here to here is a quarter. The reason we bring this up is because we got to be able to mark our x-axes. Now what I like to do is I know the period's pi. I'm going to put pi right here at the end. I am going to put negative pi at this end. Then just cut that in half on both sides. And this is negative pi over 2, and this is pi over 2. Now you know, based on what we just talked about, this is going to be pi over 4, and this is going to be 3 pi over 4. Okay? I'm not putting those in, but I know what they are, just because I like to keep it as clean as possible. Now my period's 5. Up here, I went up as high as 1, because there's a 1, unwritten 1 right here in front, right? Now I have this 5 written in front, so I need to go up as high as 5. So what I do is it's going to mark my, it's the same process. 0, 0, this is going to be at 5, pi over 2, it's 0. At 3 pi over 4, it's going to be negative 5, and at pi, it's going to be back at 0. And then I just repeat the process on the left side of the y-axis. So this is what your sine curve looks like based on those conditions. Here I have y2 cosine pi over 3. Amplitude is 2. Period is 2 pi over pi over 3, which equals 6. Quarter period equals 3 over 2. Because I'm taking 6 divided by 4, and that gives me the 3 over 2. My period's 6. So I put a 6 here, put a negative 6 here. This is 3. That's negative 3. I go as high as 2 and as low as negative 2. So that means I'm going to start right here at 0, 2. At 1.5, I cross the x-axis. At 3, I'm going to be at negative 2. At 4.5, I am at 0, and at 6, I'm at 2. And then let's repeat this on the other side of the y-axis. So this is what your cosine curve is going to look like based on those conditions that we have. Now, I'm sure you guys didn't think that, this is pretty easy, no big deal. We can just move right along. Well, you also know that we're going to add some stuff to this, right? Of course. Okay, a couple things. In general, though, your cosine or sine curve is going to be y equals a sine bx minus c plus d, or y equals a cosine bx minus c plus d. When you do this, you want to make sure that you factor out the b, okay? Because that's going to be your period. A couple other things that you need to write down. If a is less than 0, in other words, it's negative, flip over the midline. So if you're flipping over the midline, it's kind of like flipping over the horizontal axis or the x-axis, depending on what you have. If b is less than 0, flip over the y-axis. Okay? The constant c creates a horizontal translation or a phase shift of the curves, which means you can shift this left or right. C over B is a phase shift. The left and right endpoints of one cycle can be determined by solving equations bx minus c equals 0 and bx minus c equals 2 pi. The constant d creates a vertical translation of the curves. And again, if d is greater than 0, shifts d units up. If d is less than 0, it's going to shift it down. All right, let's take a look at a couple of these. A, or amplitude, equals 3. Period equals 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Quarter period equals pi over 4. Phase shift, which I'm going to abbreviate PS, is none. Vertical translation, down 1. Now, in terms of this equation up here, this is A, this is your B, that's C, and that's D on this equation right here. Now this is a cosine curve, okay? Now you see this phase shift right here? My midline was the x-axis before. My midline, which was the x-axis, is now going to be right here at y equals 1. I'm sorry, negative 1. I have this amplitude of 3. So I go up and down 3 from this midline. 1, 2, 3. So my high point is going to be right here at 2. The low point is going to occur right here at negative 4. Okay? That's where they're going to occur. Because you're going up and down 3 from your phase shift. Or excuse me, your vertical translation. 1, 2, 3, 4. This represents pi, so this is pi over 2. This is going to be negative pi over 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 2 pi. And this here is going to be 3 pi over 2. Okay? Of course, that's 0. Now what you do is just go in and you're going to put dots where the translations, where the everything takes place. And this needs to be down here. Up. You need to pause the video so you understand what's happening. So again, quarter periods, pi over 4, pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, or pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, pi, and so on. 5 pi over 4, 3 pi over 2, and so on, okay? Now what I'm going to do is connect my dots. Just make your the curve as smooth as possible. And again, this is your midline. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. I have y equals 2 sine, in parentheses 1/2 x, minus 3 pi over 2. I need to rewrite this. I got to pull out the 1/2 on the x. Y equals 2 sine 1/2 x minus 3 pi. This 3 pi, that's your phase shift. That means you're going to shift everything left, shift everything right. Amplitude is 2. Period is 2 pi over 1/2, which is 4 pi. Quarter period equals, well, that's going to equal pi. Phase shift, right, 3 pi. Vertical translation, none. Again, this is my A, B, C, and D. Now what we need to do is we need to think about this phase shift, okay? Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, and this here is going to be 2 pi, negative 2 pi, okay? Now we're not shifting this up and down at all. There's no vertical translation, but there's a phase shift. What I need to think about is my center of my graph has got to go through, it's got to go right there at 3 pi. It's got to be going up from here. That's because it's 3 pi. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of put a light line right through here, vertical line right through there. Think about that as your axis, your y-axis, kind of like this. I'm going to base everything off of that. Amplitude's 2, so I go up 2 and down 2 from there. So at 4 pi, I'm at 2. 5 pi, I'm at 0. 6 pi, I'm at negative 2. 7 pi, I'm at 0. 8 pi, I'm at positive 2. I'm just going to continue this pattern. And that pi, I'm going to get here. 0, I'm there, and so on. So this is what my curve is going to look like. I want to go over that again. Recognize that you have a phase shift of 3 pi. Put your vertical axis there, and then everything's based off of that in terms of where you're going to put your points. Okay, here we have y equals -1/2 sine x over 3 plus 3 pi over 2 minus 3. So there's a lot going on here, right? So what this really equals is -1/2 sine of 1/3 x plus 9 pi over 2 minus 3. You take 3 pi over 2 and divide it by a third, and that's how I get the 9 pi over 2. Now, this negative sign is telling me I'm going to be flipping it over the midline. A, which is your amplitude, is going to equal 1/2. Your period, which is B, is 2 pi over 1/3, which equals 6 pi. Quarter period equals 3 pi over 2. Phase shift left 9 pi over 2. Vertical translation is going to be down 3. So let's do the easy thing first, and that's put in the vertical translation. Now, let's go back to this guy right here. Your phase shift to 9 pi over 2. Before I get there, that's -3 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. -3 pi, -9 pi over 2, and -6 pi. So left 9 pi over 2, so I'm going to put a vertical line right here, really light. Now what I do next is I have to pay attention to that negative sign right there. So first thing I'm going to do is put a point right there. That's my starting point for sine. Usually sine would start by going up, but I have to go down because it's a negative sign. Whoops, I made a little mistake here. The mistake is I can only go half. So that's what your curve is going to look like. Again, dotted line's your midline. So here we are being asked to write a sine curve and a cosine curve of that graph. All right, no big deal. My midline is right there, y equals 1. From there, my amplitude is 3. Oh, by the way, vertical translation is up 1. Period looks like it completes 1 revolution in pi units. I'm not shifting this at all for sine anyway. Doesn't look like it. Maybe I am. All right, here we go. Let's go ahead and write this in. My sine curve could be negative 3. The reason it's negative because it's coming down. Sine x. Now let's go back up here to period. Remember, b is going to be equal to 2 pi over the period. 2 pi over pi, which is 2. So that's 2x. I shifted it up 1, so this is going to be a plus 1. So this would represent a sine curve of that graph. Now my cosine curve. Now what I'm going to do for cosine, remember, starts at the top. So this mark right here is going to be represented by pi over 8. Y equals 3 cosine. Whoops, forgot to do 2 times x plus, this has got to be shifted, pi over 4. I said pi over 8, I think, but it's really pi over 4 because that's what that mark is right there. Plus 1. So I'd move that this way. Now what you could do is you also set it up where you move this mark that way. So instead of this being x plus pi over 4, you could have 3 pi over 2 in there. Okay? Hey, let me know if you have any questions on this section. I'll be glad to answer them. Just take it easy.